I will be comparing the poem The Criminal Five by Khalil Gibran and the political cartoon Lost Children by Adam Zeigles. The universal topics I have determined for both texts are poverty and crime. And the thematic statement that I have made is society's ignorance towards the poor builds the bridge for crime. This is the text of the Criminal Five, and as you can see, Criminal Five is a narrative poem. It is also written in prose, but there is a narrator who is telling the story. There's also a setting, which is city, modern day time. There's a conflict, man versus society. There are characters, arguably only one character, the man, and there are also dialogues. Criminal Five is about a man living in poverty, begging on the streets, and the focus of the poem is when the man decides to turn against the city and start to take it in the name of evil, as the poem put it. The poem discusses what poverty forces a man to do in desperate times, and in this case, poverty. This is the political cartoon Lost Children. As you can see, it is a political cartoon, and immediately the words I identify are crime, poverty, and drugs, written on the walls. There is also a link to current events, which is the event Turning the Corner, which is a political project, which we'll get into later. The shape I identified is the maze. It's very complicated shapes, routes, turns, and corners. The elements, or the characters actually, are the politician and the children. As you can see, the big politician standing on the left, and the children inside of the maze. After a few more looks, I determined that Lost Children is about how poor people are stuck in a maze and how their only way out is to choose either crime or drugs. Context and time. The Criminal Five was published in 1920 to 1930s by Khalil Gibran. Gibran is a Lebanese-American poet and writer, and his family moved to America and immediately fell into poverty. Therefore, Gibran knew what it felt like and wrote many stories and poems about people in hard times, such as the poem Criminal Five. This relates to a historic event because back then it was very hard for foreigners to make a lot of money in the United States. So it was relating to the historical time. Lost Children was published in 2007 by Adam Zeigles. So Adam Zeigles is an editorial cartoonist working for the Buffalo News, which is his city, and he has connections with the city. And the important historical event here is Turning the Corner, which is a research project done by the city of Buffalo to research into housing development in different neighborhoods and driving for change in terms of creating a more equitable city for everyone. And instead of having multiple neighborhoods of rich and a lot of poor neighborhoods, they want to combine them and let them balance out. So how does the poem communicate the theme? Well, first of all, Gibran uses imagery in yellow to let the audience feel the reality that a man has to live in, which is filled with begging and sadness, using words such as stretching his hand toward who passed and repeating his hand toward who passed, and to repeating the song of his defeat life to further highlight the man's desperation in times of poverty. Furthermore, Gibran uses repetition on the word begging and repeating to emphasize the endless cycle of this man's day, as he must repeat these actions every day in order to survive. Here is a shift in tone, which matters a lot in context of the poem. And here, Gibran uses symbolism. Gibran symbolizes the stick as the man's weapon. To give a little bit of context, he is done with people not giving him a chance, and now he is turning against the city. The stick actually symbolizes a determination, more and a weapon, but rather more a determination, as he points it at the city almost like a knife or a gun, sharp and dangerous, showing poverty has driven him out of options. Diction is also very important in the Criminal V. For example, he lifted his puzzled eyes to heaven. The words puzzled eyes show the audience that the man is lost and has lost a sense of direction for life, which works as foreshadowing, as this is the beginning of the poem and we know what happened after. Crushed all who opposed him. This was towards the end, and the word crushed exaggerates how he uses brute force to defeat anyone who tried to stop him. So how does a political cartoon communicate its theme? Well, it's done through elements, colors, words, and the allusion to a topic or event in the world that the author wants to criticize. First, I have identified words. So we have poverty in the center, then you have drugs and crime on each side of it. And the shape I see a maze. It maybe symbolizes endless cycles, maybe impossible to navigate through, maybe complicated to escape, but it can mean many things. But however, the biggest element I see is the contrast between the characters. The children in the maze are short, small, and weak, and confused, don't know where to go, which is a clear contrast to the politician. He's a big character, has all the attention, and holds all the power. So how does this communicate the theme? Well, the position of the words in relation to the maze is a very important one. Poverty is in the middle and seems to be at the start of the maze. And the children have entered there. And it means that as soon as you entered poverty, you can make a choice. However, here's only two, crime and drugs. So the author did this to show that there are no other options except crime and drugs as soon as you enter poverty. The cartoon also alludes to the historic event Turning the Corner, that implying that even though these tests and experiments are carried out, the poor still stays poor and will lead to crime. And the politician also has a major impact on this, as he is probably the one that initiated this testing. However, he is ignoring the fact that below him, people are still suffering, even though he did all these fancy tests. The words turning the corner works as a pun. In this case, it can mean both meanings. It can mean the experiment that they carried out, which is literally called turning the corner, and however, it can also mean something related to the maze. As in the maze, you have to navigate left and right, turning corners, and again, it leads back to once you entered poverty, you turn the corner and you see crime. You turn into the other corner, you see drugs, and these are dead ends that you cannot escape. So, connection between the two texts. Well, both characters find themselves in an endless cycle of poverty. Both characters meaning the people in poverty. In Criminal 5, uses symbolism, similes, and repetition to show the man's journey into crime and how he had to repeat every day begging on the street and repeating his failure of finding a real job, and in the end he had to be forced to commit crime. And whereas The Lost Children uses shapes and elements, especially the maze, to show that in this cycle you can't really escape a maze, and in the end you will end up on those drugs and criminal activities. Another connection I found was both texts have characters of high social class, so which usually contrasts to the main character. In Criminal 5, that would be the businessman who, for example, the businessman who refused to hire him, whereas in Lost Children, it would be the politician. Both of these characters lack empathy, and perhaps that's what the authors of these two texts want to tell us, that people of high social class usually ignore and forget that people under them are suffering. Lastly, both texts again conveys the same message. No matter how one gets there or no matter the circumstances, poverty will lead to crime. And for example, in Criminal 5, the man is desperate. He is living on the streets, and even though he is able to make some living off of begging, his self-esteem and his failure to find a job makes him literally go insane and in the end commits crime. Whereas in Lost Children, the children are confused, as a lot of people do in poverty. They have to try and fight for their lives, and in the end, as again a desperation to make more money, they usually turn to criminal activities or drugs. And so that is the connection. Here is my works cited.